Like a silver streak across the midnight sky, our stories move with a brilliance and speed you will never forget. Experience high-octane drama and the thrill of a narrative that never slows down for anything. Click subscribe now and catch the streak before it disappears into the dark.
They told me they were drowning in debt. That's the exact phrase my mother used. Drowning in debt. When I called her crying from the hospital parking garage, sitting on the concrete floor, because my legs had stopped working right after the doctor said the words renal failure and transplant list in the same sentence about my 23-year-old daughter. That was 4 years ago. My daughter's name is Noelle. She was born 3 weeks early in the middle of a November ice storm, and she came into the world screaming so loud the nurse laughed and said, "That one's going to be just fine." She was. For 22 years, she was just fine. Smart and stubborn and funny in that dry way where you didn't always know if she was joking. She'd just started nursing school. She wanted to work in pediatric oncology because, she said, someone has to be the person who makes it not so scary for the kids. Then her kidneys started failing. The doctors never found a clean explanation. One specialist said it might have been a viral infection years earlier that just quietly did damage over time. Another mentioned genetics. It didn't matter much in the end. What mattered was that she needed a transplant, and she needed to get on the list. And getting on the list required $28,000 up front. Not for the surgery itself. Just to be evaluated, cleared, and registered. Just to exist on a piece of paper that meant someone might save her life someday. $28,000. My husband and I had maybe $6,000 in savings. We'd spent the previous year paying off his mother's funeral costs and catching up on bills we'd let slide during a stretch when I'd had my hours cut at work. We weren't poor, but we weren't okay either. We were the kind of not okay that looks fine from the outside. I called my parents. My father answered, which meant my mother was standing right next to him. Because that's how it always worked in their house. They had one shared opinion on every topic and delivered it in shifts. I told him everything. Noelle's diagnosis, the $28,000, the timeline. What happens if she doesn't get on the list in time? I was not emotional on that call. I'd already used up my emotions in the parking garage. I was clinical and clear because I wanted him to hear me and not get distracted by my crying. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Sweetheart, you know we'd do anything for Noelle. You know that. But we're stretched so thin right now. Your mother's medications have gone up again. And we had that business with the roof last spring. We're barely keeping our heads above water. Drowning in debt. Heads above water." They liked their metaphors, aquatic. My mother took the phone. She cried. She said it broke her heart. She said she wished things were different. She said she wished things were different. She said she'd pray for Noelle every single day. She said, if we had it, it would already be in your account. I believed her. I shouldn't have. But I did. We started a fundraiser. My husband posted it everywhere. Facebook, Reddit, his work Slack channel, his college alumni group. My coworkers donated. Noelle's nursing school professors donated. A woman 3 states away who'd lost her own daughter to kidney disease sent $500 and a handwritten note that I still have in my bedside drawer. Strangers and neighbors, and people we'd never met, scraped together what they could. And we were grateful for every single dollar. And it still wasn't enough. We got Noelle on the list with a combination of the fundraiser money, a personal loan we're still paying off, and a hospital financial assistance program that my husband spent 6 weeks fighting to qualify for. She waited 14 months. 14 months of dialysis 3 times a week, of watching her get thinner and grayer, of watching her try to stay cheerful about it because that was who she was. She'd sit in that dialysis chair and do flashcard drills for her nursing courses, which she refused to drop out of. And sometimes she'd catch me watching her and give me a small smile that gutted me every time. The transplant came through in the spring. A 27-year-old man in another state, a motorcycle accident. His family said yes. I think about them more than I can say. Noelle's recovery was hard and slow. But she recovered. She's okay now. She finished nursing school. She works in pediatric oncology, exactly like she said she would. This is not a tragedy. I want to be clear about that. Because what comes next is ugly enough, without adding a dead child to it. My daughter lived. And my parents lied. I found out by accident, the way you find out most things that people try to keep from you. My brother's wife, her name is Simone, and she and I have never been close, but we're not unfriendly. Made a comment at my nephew's birthday party 2 years ago. She was showing photos on her phone of their new house. They'd moved 6 months earlier, bought a place in a suburb about 40 minutes from where my parents live. Nice neighborhood. Good school district. Your parents were so generous, she said. Not to be cruel. I genuinely believe she thought I already knew. We couldn't have done the down payment without them. I kept my face very still. I asked how much they contributed. 40,000, she said. 42 actually. They insisted. She looked at me then, and I watched her realize. The birthday party continued around us. My nephew was shrieking with joy over a remote control car. My husband was laughing at something my brother had said. And I stood in that kitchen holding a cup of lemonade, doing the math in my head. $42,000 to help my brother buy a house. $28,000 that they didn't have when my daughter was dying. The timeline overlapped. That's the part that took me a while to process. They hadn't given my brother the money after Noelle recovered. Or even after the transplant, the transfer. I found this out later, through a conversation I probably shouldn't have pushed for but did. Happened in the same 6-month window when they were telling me they were drowning. I drove home from that birthday party in complete silence. My husband asked me twice if I was okay, and I said yes both times. And the second time he didn't ask again because he knows me well enough to know when yes means no, and I need him to wait. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat at the kitchen table and I told him everything. He's a quiet person, my husband. He doesn't yell or explode. He just went very still, the way he does when something is too big to react to normally. And then he said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" I didn't know yet. I thought about calling my parents. I rehearsed the conversation in my head 100 different ways. I thought about screaming. I thought about saying nothing forever. I thought about forwarding them the loan statements we were still paying down every month, and letting them figure it out. I ended up doing something in between. I asked my mother to have lunch with me, just the two of us, and I told her I knew about the down payment. She went pale. She didn't deny it. I almost wish she had. Denial would have at least been a choice, something she committed to. Instead, she just started crying and saying, it's complicated. And eventually what came out was something about how my brother had been struggling, how his wife's career change had left them financially unstable, how they hadn't wanted to tell me because they knew I'd feel hurt. You knew I would feel hurt, I repeated. We didn't want to make things harder for you. You had so much on your plate with Noelle. I needed $28,000, I said. Noelle needed to be on a transplant list. You told me you were drowning in debt, and then you gave my brother $42,000 to buy a house. She cried harder. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't know what to say. I left lunch early. I paid for my own food and drove away, and did not call them for 4 months. My brother called me 3 weeks into the silence. He said he'd heard I was upset. He said he understood why, but that their financial situation had been genuinely difficult at the time, and maybe I didn't have the full picture. I asked him if he had known. Long pause. I knew they were helping us, he said. I didn't know all the details of your situation. Which might have been true. Might have been. I don't know how much my parents told him about what I'd asked for and what they'd said to me. I don't know if he understood what was happening while it was happening. I chose to believe he didn't. Mostly because the alternative made something in my chest go cold in a way I wasn't ready to deal with. I told him I needed more time. He said he understood. He was kind about it, which almost made it worse. 14 months later, my brother had a heart attack. He was 41 years old. He was in good shape. He ran. He watched what he ate. He had a physical every year. Sometimes it doesn't matter. He was at his office when it happened, and a coworker called 911 fast enough that he made it to the ER. But the damage to his heart was significant. The cardiologist used a word I had to look up: cardiomyopathy. His heart muscle was damaged, weakened, and the damage was extensive enough that they were recommending he be evaluated for a transplant. Not immediately, not as a certainty, but as a serious possibility. My mother called me. She was barely coherent. I could hear my father in the background making the low sound he makes when he's trying not to break down. And something complicated happened in me. Because Noelle was alive. Because I knew what this road looked like. Because whatever my parents had done to me, they were still my parents. And I drove to that hospital. I sat with them in the waiting room for 5 hours. I didn't say anything meaningful. I got them coffee. I answered the questions from the hospital social worker about family history when my mother couldn't form sentences. I stayed until we knew he was stable. The next few weeks were a blur of cardiology appointments and second opinions. My brother came home. He started cardiac rehab. And then his cardiologist, a serious woman with short gray hair who did not sugarcoat things, sat down with him and his wife and my parents and me in a conference room and explained that the transplant evaluation was now more than theoretical. And then she said something I hadn't expected. She said that based on his blood work and tissue typing, living donation was a possibility worth exploring. Not of a whole heart. You can't donate a whole heart and live. But there were cases, emerging protocols, where certain procedures, I won't pretend I fully understood the medical explanation in the moment, could potentially involve a biological family member as part of the treatment pathway. She said they would need to test everyone willing to be tested. Everyone looked at me. I want to be accurate about this moment because I've replayed it a lot. Nobody asked me directly. Nobody said, "Will you be tested?" My parents didn't say a word. My brother looked at his hands. His wife looked at me with an expression that had too many things in it to name. I said, "Send me the paperwork." What happened after that? I was not prepared for. The testing was extensive and took about 3 weeks. And when the results came back, the cardiologist called me personally, which I understand now meant what she was going to say mattered. I was a match, not just a partial match. A strong match on the relevant markers. She explained what the potential procedure would involve, the recovery, the risks, what they would be asking of my body. She was careful and honest about all of it. That night, I lay awake next to my husband for a long time. He didn't tell me what to do. He never does, with things like this. He asked me what I was thinking, and I said, I didn't know yet, and he said, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." That's it. That's the whole thing. I've thought about it many times since. How much those 6 words mattered. How much they weighed. I thought about Noelle. I thought about the man who died in a motorcycle accident in another state, and his family who said yes. I thought about what it means to be the person who can help and doesn't. I thought about a parking garage floor, and a phone call, and drowning in debt. I went to see my brother alone, without telling anyone I was coming. He was home by then, moving slowly, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He let me in and we sat in his living room and I looked at him, my brother, who I had chased around the backyard when we were small, who gave a speech at my wedding that made everyone cry. Who I did not know had possibly looked the other way while our parents let my daughter risk her life. And I said, "Did you know? at the time, what I was going through. He looked at the floor for a long time. I knew you were asking them for help, he said. I didn't know how serious it was. They told me Noelle was sick, but that you had it handled. Did you know they gave you money while I was asking? Another long pause. Not while it was happening. I found out later. After. Did you ever think about telling me? He didn't answer. That was its own answer. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes. Then I called the cardiologist and told her I was moving forward with the evaluation for donation. My reasons were not simple. And I don't think I need to make them simple. I thought about Simone, who had nothing to do with any of this and whose husband was dying. I thought about my nephew, who was 10 years old. I thought about who I was and what I could live with. I thought about Noelle, who chose a job where she holds the hands of sick children, who didn't become bitter, who decided that surviving something didn't mean closing yourself off from other people's pain. I thought about the fact that I did not want to become what my parents became in that moment, in the parking garage. I didn't want to be someone who calculated the cost of another person's life and decided it was more than they were willing to pay. So, I did it. The procedure was not easy. The recovery was longer than I expected. There were 3 weeks where I could not drive, and my husband took time off work and my mother came to help. And that was strange. Her being in my house, making soup, being gentle with me. Neither of us talked about it directly. There was a conversation we were both waiting to have that we kept not having. My brother's surgery went well. Not perfectly. There were complications in the first week. A secondary infection, a longer ICU stay than planned. But he came through. He's in cardiac rehab now. He looks more like himself. Last month he sent me a card, handwritten, that said a lot of things I'm not going to repeat because they're between him and me. But I read it twice and then I put it away. My parents came to see me while I was still recovering. They sat in my living room, both of them. And my mother held my hand and cried for a long time. My father, who almost never speaks in emotional moments, said, "We were wrong. What we did to you. There's no excuse for it, and I'm not going to try to make one." It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. I didn't forgive them in that moment. I'm not sure I've forgiven them now, in the complete way that gets described in inspirational posts and therapy workbooks. One I have is something more complicated. A kind of understanding that people do terrible things out of favoritism and fear and a refusal to look at what they're actually doing. And that those terrible things don't always come from hate. Sometimes they come from a small, quiet, monstrous version of love that picks one person and protects them and pretends the rest isn't happening. That doesn't make it okay. But it explains it. And for now, explained is enough. My parents sold their investment property last year. They put the money into a fund that helps families cover the upfront costs of transplant evaluations, the kind of thing that almost stopped Noelle from ever getting her chance. I didn't ask them to do it. I heard about it through my aunt. I don't know if it was guilt or grief or some actual change in how they see things. Maybe it doesn't matter which one it was. Noelle started a new rotation last month. She came home for dinner on a Tuesday and sat at my kitchen table and told us about a 6-year-old she'd been with that week. A little girl with leukemia who was terrified of her IV, but who had agreed to let Noelle stay with her if Noelle would name all the countries in South America in alphabetical order while they did the stick. So Noelle learned all the countries in South America in alphabetical order. I watched her talk and I thought about the woman who sent $500 and a handwritten note from 3 states away. I thought about a dialysis chair and flashcards. I thought about a phone call in a parking garage, and my mother's voice saying, "If we had it, it would already be in your account." I don't know what to do with all of it. I don't think I'm supposed to know yet. I just know that she's here. And on most days, that's the thing I hold on to, that she's here. And she's naming countries for a 6-year-old. And the world is a little less terrible for it.